Well, we're leaving San Juanito. Another day, another learning experience. So changed the belts on my engine. The alternator belt was slipping. The water pump belt was slipping. Can't really say I fixed them, but changed them and they're somewhat working, although the downstairs is smoky as hell. And I'm hoping that's just new belts being squeaky. Eating the age-old Quaker instant oatmeal. I gotta admit, the Mexican Quaker oatmeal is not as good. It is much less sugary. Got 2 lines out with my pole and my new pole holder. Got a shrimpy thing rigged up to the hand line, rigged up to that winch. So if I catch the big one, I can reel it in with the winch. Let's talk shells. So here's a bunch of treasures. Plan is to throw most of them back over the side for other people to find in the future. You can see that I have too many, but that's one of the joys of living on a boat going to the beach every day, is finding things. We have loads of clams. Clams on clams on clams and oysters. It's kind of cool to see a little bit of diversity of what we have. These ones are probably the most common. A newer one or a shinier one, and then obviously older, faded out. We have scallops. Here's another type of scallop. 2 or 3 different types of scallops that some people collect and eat. Oysters. Over here we have blood. Or no, sorry. These are chocolates. And they are very tasty. Even someone who hates shellfish, like myself, can attest to it. There's a number of rock-dwelling limpets. So this one probably attached to a rock as a single shell, not as a double shell. Everything else would be double shells. Another of the sand bottom dwellers are the augers. These are really common in some places and quite hard to find in others. They really like sandy, flat bottoms. You can actually sometimes see them making trails across the bottom. Often their issue is a broken tip. So you can't quite see it, but well, this one's a better example. Many of them, when they come to the beach, end up with broken tips. So finding one that's both good color and has a tip is hard to do. These are all going over the side. These are the conchs. Slightly different from their Caribbean brethren. We still have one that we have turned into a trumpet or a horn. These two over here are actually not technically conchs, but they're in a similar family. Again, finding ones that are undamaged, but yet still retaining their color and their sheen is the hard thing to do. This is called a helmet shell. Quite a pretty specimen. They can get much larger than this. And I'm blanking on the name of this guy. I think it's M something. But quite an interesting shell he's got going on. And I am bad at this. And these are one of my favorite types of shells. These are one of my favorite types of shells. These are called olive shells. You can see they come in many different sizes. The species are all differentiated by their variety of patterns. You can see most of these are the same. They have this like W or wavy pattern. I'm not sure exactly which species of olive they are. Something that's kind of nice to point out or neat to point out. Notice how this one's pattern disappears or kind of blurs here. So that is often a product of fresh water. We made the mistake early on in our shell collecting. We caught some really nice, pretty shells, and we tried to wash them off in fresh water and soap. And what the fresh water does is it actually strips off their coloration. And so it takes what was previously a nice, pretty shell and kind of ruins actually the luster and the sheen. Here's another one that has been stripped of its coloration. It's still pretty, but it completely loses its identification. One other kind of neat thing to point out, many of these olives have had their points, I believe, chewed off. So there's something out there that likes to eat olives, and the way it does it is by nibbling through the points of their shell. And this is, it happens for many of the other shells as well, but olives, it is very, very common. Little itty bitty guy. There's my hand for size. I didn't show you the olive's underside, so there we go. Olive's underside. These are the cowries. Probably the most beautiful group of shells. They're not very common in the Sea of Cortez. There is something to note that this coloration or this pattern is due to freshwater contamination or freshwater destruction. So they do have a different pattern normally that when they get rained on or they get fresh water on them, it strips off their luster and their coloration. The way these cowries act when they're alive is there's a mollusk that lives in here, and it actually has two lips that spread out, come up on either side, and cover this external shell. When it does that, that mantle, it's called, has camouflage and really makes these things blend into the reef. Oftentimes they look just like a little piece of algae, or even with dangles included on the mantle. So not a bunch of good specimens, but they are a really pretty group of shells when you find a good one. These are the cone shells. Quite an apt name, obviously. The most interesting fact about cone shells, they don't occur usually with rocks growing in them, but the mollusk inside of a cone shell is actually quite poisonous. Not to eat, but rather with its own harpoon. So it's a snail, it's a mollusk, and has a something. Google it on Wikipedia. Cone shells, super cool. They have a poisonous harpoon that they crawl along the seabed and then stab fish or prey with that poisonous harpoon and then eat them. So if you ever see a live one of these, don't touch it. They come in very different sizes, very different shapes, very different patterns. Lots of cones out there. Rare to find one that is both colorful and still in good shape. a variety of other treasures we have. This is a sea biscuit. They live underneath the sand or partially buried, relative of the sea urchin. I think that's their anus. I think that's their mouth, but I'm not really sure. Very, very, very fragile. So this thing would shatter in my hands quite easily. This is a little bubble shell. Pretty cool little thing. This right here is called an operculum, and operculums are the trap doors for certain shells. So this was once the foot, or attached to the foot of a snail, and he would close this, or she would close this when bothered. These are sundials, like the olive. Very rare to find one with its tip. Often their tips are ripped off. Limpets, part of a tulip, so destroyed. And then here we have one of the larger feather duster worms. Really solid, probably calcium carbonate outer tube within which lived a feather duster. This, my friends, is not a dinosaur. It's an eel. The rest of it was once attached. But how cool is this jaw? Look at these teeth. The way this jaw is hinged allows the mouth to basically open wide in two directions. Here's its bottom teeth. Here's another tooth of something. Not sure. Not sure what this guy is a tooth for. Maybe a tongue, I thought. And then these are quite cool. You find this wood everywhere. This wood is actually a cactus branch. Yep, that's what the inside of a cactus grows like.
Here's my paddle for here. It's quite pretty in a tigerish way, huh?